Hello everyone, my name is Dee Dee Butler and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, 30-Minute Training Vulcan Gantt Scheduler. Your host today is Rosemary Rogers. Rosemary is a mining engineer with our Technical Services Group and provides consulting and training services to the North American region. A few things before we get started. First, today's webinar will conclude with a question and answer session, so please feel free to write questions in the panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Also, you will receive a link to a recording of this webinar by email in case you'd like to see it again. It will also be available on the Maptek website at a later date. I'll now hand it over to Rosemary.
Good morning, everyone, and happy Wednesday. Welcome to our webinar on VGS. Today we're going to look at some things on the envisage side specific to attributing data with templated attributes, triangulation attributes. We're going to create activities in the schedule, look at the design integration, filtering, sequence, level, and report our schedule, as well as additional tools to help us analyze the schedule information, such as coloring critical path and scripting opportunities. So here I am in envisage, and I have a very small data set here, but just to highlight everything we have, all the tools available. We have template attributes here can be seen in the property editor. As I select these center lines, you'll see the various attribute information on each of them. This ramp specifically only has 4 attributes, so a way I can add the additional ones available in my template is design template attributes, assign data, and I can pick any of the templates I've set up. I have this name attribute set up to automatically assign a naming convention to my ramp, as well as a primitive size. So now I have 2 more attributes, name and primitive, and this allows me, once I apply all of this to my data in bulk, this allows me to then apply primitives in bulk to all of my center lines regardless of the cross section. So normally you come into this panel and you pick a primitive and apply it, but now instead I've added that to my templated attributes. I can use attribute editor, select a given object or all of my center lines, and then change a given attribute, such as the primitive field, from another one. So I can look at this attribute primitive and apply to all. Now I have that in here, this field, and then you'll see this primitive's automatically applied to my data. I can control the primitive visibility through the attribute editor as well, and hide and show as needed. Once I've applied that primitive, I can then assign additional attributes to that ramp, such as tons and volume. That's in my physicals template. And this, when I bring it up, you'll see has tons, volume, and grade. Grade's not really applicable to my ramp, but now I have that information on the center line. So this is the process that was done for all of the data, but once you get the setup going, you can do it to all of your center lines at a given point in time. We also have triangulation attributes. Those can be done singularly or in bulk. So in the property editor, you'll also see I have a bunch of attributes associated with this particular triangulation. I can select this triangulation and go to attributes. Here I can add any particular attribute I want. So this one I'm saying, okay, fill type, it's actually uppers, so when I bring it into the schedule, those won't have filling activities associated with them. And this is now, oh, I forgot to hit the add button. One more time, fill type and uppers, and then we can add, and then we can modify, delete, clear any of those attributes as well from that panel. With that on, I can select all of these triangulations and set those to uppers as well. To do this in bulk, it's through the Model Triangle Attributes CSV Import Attributes menu. You can set up any kind of spec file and any number of scenarios here. So I can run advanced reserves and write that data back. But here you'll see a preview of my CSV file, which contains just the region, which is basically the triangulation of relative path and name, and then my confidence attribute that's been applied to that's been set against all of those names. The attributes tab allows me to pick which attributes within that file. If I had 20 and I only want 5 of them, I pick which ones I want to apply to the triangulations. And I can also color triangulations by that attribute as I import it or later on. So this is bringing in a confidence measured, indicated, inferred attribute so that in the scheduler maybe I want to discount those ounces if they're less confident or more risky. Just gives you additional flexibility to adjust your calculations as needed. We have our nice colored data set here now, so red, yellow, and blue. And on a given triangulation, you'll see that confidence attribute. So once I have this data set to go with what I'm interested to start with anyway, you can always add as you go as far as attributes. I can open Gantt. Gantt's launched directly from Envisage, so it's an additional module, and this way it's integrated with your design the entire time. So we have a basic template for the start of this project, and I'll go over some of the settings, but it's all set up such that I can just select my data and create activities. You'll see an activity name is populated automatically as well as what type it should be. So I have filling, drilling, and stoping activities for all of my triangulations. Once I have the data in the Gantt chart, you'll see it's populated. I have different colors depending on the activity type. And pardon me while we get a little cozy on our real estate here. This is always best with 2 monitors when you're working in the scheduler. But as I select any data element on the Envisage side, it highlights the corresponding line items on the Gantt side. So it gives me a lot of opportunity to interact with the data, and similarly when I'm selecting data on the Gantt side. I also can filter my data very easily, so look at drifting, and now I see only my center lines are available. I could further hone that in and look at just whatever has 100 in the naming, so level 100. And then I can save any of those filters. So any of the ones I do on the column heading on the fly, I can save them, and it fills in the syntax for me. So now I have that filled in. I can generate filters in bulk. So if I look at generate filters, I can look at confidence and push that over, and now it will read every unique value, including nulls, of my confidence variable. That's how the rest of these were generated, so it did a unique combination of level and activity type. So every unique combination I have of those attributes, as well as every single level I had. Those were all created with the generate filters option. We also have advanced filtering modes, so if you're more comfortable with typing or have a really complicated filtering formula, you can type that in instead of use the pull downs. Then all of these are available from the drop-down menu to look, and the view adjusts accordingly. Another useful thing is grouping. Grouping here, I can group by level and activity type. And as I collapse and expand a particular level, same thing. You'll see the data disappearing from the screen on the other side. Everything you start with is on the Setup tab, so Setup, Attributes, and Activity Types are where you usually start out with. And here I can add any additional attributes as I go that I'm interested in. So one in particular is whether it's capital or expensed. So I can add this type in, and you'll see as I type the expression I can separate it out for design data or triangulations. And as I start to type what I'm after, it's reading the attribute over here. And so I have the capital expensed one, and I can just double click. The triangulation one, we have a nice function called index split. And this is great when I have a naming convention, but I don't necessarily have the same exact number of characters everywhere. What this requires is, you have a split string that you identify, such as an underscore, and then a split number. So number 5 is the 5th component of my triangulation name that contains this attribute field. I can also calculate other attributes just based on Gantt attributes alone. So one example is calculating ounces based on the grade. I have diluted AU in here, and then I have diluted tons. And one example of using that confidence variable is via lookup table. So we have lookup tables that allow me to identify the table name. The key is the confidence attribute that I brought in. And then the values, the first column in the table, we can have one key and then multiple value columns, and then a default value if the key is not in the table itself. So this, I have a factor of 1 or 0.9 depending on the confidence level. Once you add new attributes, you'll come into activity types, and for these you'll want to check on the appropriate attributes to calculate for a given activity type. So you can check them all on at once in the beginning, but as you add attributes as you move along, you can check those on as well. Okay. So once we've brought in our data, the next step is to sequence it. So to do that, there's a number of different ways. We have spatial options. We have manual precedenting in the Gantt chart. You can set precedence via the Gantt bars, as well as in the design, on the design side, with envisaged manual precedences. The nice part about spatial is we can set up a bunch of rules and run them all at once in a batch mode. And you'll see here it's starting to do the search with the progress bar, and it'll run through all of those rules at once. If we hone in on a given spatial precedence rule, I can use filters and/or activity types. So this is looking in one particular direction so that I'm retreating my stopes back towards the axis. I also can add a lag, so I give time for the drill to mobilize, or in this case for stoping to filling, I give it a day and a half so the survey crew can get in there and survey the open stope before we backfill it. But I can just run all of these at once. I can use an optional offset, so it searches for the closest intersection and then goes 5 meters beyond that closest intersection. This allows me to not have to have an exact point or even just the center line to break at that closest intersection. You saw that ramp was one continuous center line, so I don't have exact nodes where any of those level accesses are coming from. And it spits out a report on the number of precedences found for each given rule. You'll see them over here on the Gantt chart, as well as I have the toggle for precedence arrow visibility. And when I zoom in over here, you'll see those precedences. So this was the retreating, I fill this stope before I drill the next one over. And that west side filter allowed me to go in this direction back towards the center. And then I can also use envisage manual precedences to set, say, a bottom-up sequence. So you won't get necessarily 100%, but you can get a lot of it. So we have different modes, so pair mode, and then I can set it to certain activity types. So I want to only click on filling, and then my successor's drilling. So this will allow me to do a little bit of a stagger as I mine bottom up, and you'll see those arrows being generated as I move up. And the other side. So now I'm not clicking on a particular node or anything. I'm just selecting the given triangulation, but because of that setting in the panel, it lets me pick just filling and go to drilling. We also have a parallel mode in there. That a good example is maybe an egress needs to be completed before any production. So then I have one predecessor and a number of successors from there. So let's view our animation and see how we did so far. So we'll play. We see we got something that got missed over here. That could be due to maybe the point sequence of the center line is off. I didn't have the spatial precedence set correctly. And you'll see also that the triangulations are kind of all animating at once. The whole shape comes into view when that cycle is complete. So when the drilling cycle is completed, I'll see the triangulation, and then I'll see it again for mucking and filling. I can adjust that so I have a smoother animation by applying mining directions, and I can leverage my other attributes and my connection to design and use this direction one, so I look all on the west side. I can select all triangulations and easily set mining directions for that whole set that I have. There are a few different ways to set directions, indicate a dominant axis, and you'll see those mining direction arrows show up there. I can do the same on the other side, on the east side. Select all of these triangulations and indicate their mining direction back towards the center. And this isn't required, it's just another way to smooth out the animation, but you don't have to, you're not obligated to apply them. It just kind of visually enhances the animation. And then you can just hide those directions so they're out of your way. So now we can see the difference in the animation between those two. Get us rotated here again. And so you'll see that triangulation now is progressing a little bit more. So rather than the whole entire triangulation coming to view, you'll see it's animating back towards the axis. All right, so after I've sequenced everything, I can leverage some of the resource leveling options and resource tools. We can use our filters to help us with allocating resources, so I can look at just my drifting activities and allocate my drifting resource. If we look at the particular settings of each of these, we'll see in the resource settings, I basically set a capacity for that given resource, and that capacity tells me the number of concurrent headings that I can mine at a given point in time for the drifting activity, for example. Same with stoping or drilling, it says, okay, and I can mine, or I can drill out 2 stopes at once, depending on what capacity I set there. Then you can also vary the rate per activity type. So if you had one resource that works on different activity types, I can make sure I have a different rate for those given activity types. And then I can also change the capacities over time. So once I have all of this set up with the resources, I can level them and level by capacity. And this leveling by capacity basically looks at the number of capacity I have here in this default capacity setting. I can vary that over time. And then it looks at leveling setup, where I can have different priorities. So I have just priority in ascending order, but I can add grade or other information as I go to have a multi-tier or multi-hierarchy prioritization scheme. Once I have my leveling completed, I will look at my reporting options. So here I have a simple report. I want to add production ounces. Here you just type your title. You can pick from your drop down any of the attributes available. And then you have different calculation methods, so minimum, maximum, summation, accumulated sum, count, or average. And then with each of these line items, I can select by an activity type, a resource, or filter, or any combination of all three. So this I could hone in on just, say, stoping. I just want my stoping ounces instead of whatever's within the cells, is one example. You can also add additional rows and calculate a given, I'm just going to put calculated here, but instead of an attribute, I leave that blank, and then I get a formula editor. And this is another example where I could use maybe AU times my tons, and just build some expression that's only within the report. It's not an actual attribute column in the grid. Once that report is set up, it will change based on my time up here, so it'll recalculate day, week, month, or year. And then I can export that report to a CSV file. Another way to get information from Gantt is to use home create CSV, and this will spit out the whole entire activity grid over here. So all of these columns over here will be put into a CSV file. So those go right to your working directory, and they're the same thing. But I have my activity grid available, and this is every single column within that project file. So that's real quick on reporting. Another tool to help us analyze our schedule is critical path. So from there I can pick any one of these Gantt bars, select it, right-click, and go to critical path. You'll see it colors all of the bars red, a brighter red leading up to it, if it doesn't have any slack. So you can just repeat this on a different bar and go through and see where there's no slack. That other bar leading up or predecessor bar will be a bright red color. This also generates a report and gives you what activity you selected, the ID number in the report name, and then I can see my early start and finish, late start and late finish, as well as any slack. So you'll see that one didn't have very much ability to move. I can report on the whole entire project if I use the option at the top of the panel, so critical path. This just puts a whole report out for every activity and their corresponding dates. Another tool to help us visualize our schedule is color by attribute, and that's in Gantt, color by attributes. We can set up any number of scenarios and color by any schedule attribute, so anything that's in that Gantt chart. I can run that coloring scheme. So this one's just coloring by gold grade, but I could color everything by level, by mining type, and then for those stopes that have multiple activities, it's kind of a prioritization scheme. So if I want to color by backfill type, maybe I just put filling as a priority over stoping, and then I would just get a quick picture of all of my fill types within that zone or the mine. And then finally, we have some great scripting opportunities that really can help us customize what we can do with. So this one allows us to pick any report. I only have forecast in my project, but if I had any number of reports, they'd be available there. And then I can pick how I want to see this information. So then I have my ounces, and I can calculate an NPV from there, and basically just tell it what I want to see on each axis, and then it reports the information. It's not a very good project. NPV is 0. Don't buy it. But anyway, you'll see the scheduler right there gives you a nice chart, and that's just reading directly everything in the project file. That is all I have. Are there any questions?
Thanks, Rosemary. As I mentioned before, please write in any questions through the panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Let's see if we have any so far. Can you color by periods?
Yes, you can. There are a couple of options. So I mentioned we have Gantt color by attribute here, and this allows me to pick any schedule attribute. So I could color on the start date or finish date, and then just set, once I pick that particular attribute, you'll see the date format, and then I just pick my date ranges. So if that activity has a start date within this range I set, it will be colored by that. And then there's also Gantt color by periods, and this works a little bit differently, but it requires a custom period, which I didn't discuss earlier. But this custom period allows me to set up unique periods, so I could color by weeks, then quarters, then years, so it's a combination of each period type, and then that will color all of the data based on those unique periods.
Great, thanks, Rosemary. Here's another question. Can the Gantt data be exported to other software such as MS Project or Primavera?
Yes, so we have available here is export to, and that's an export to XML file, and that's a pretty standard file format that can be used in other applications, so Primavera and Project.
Wonderful, thank you. It looks like we have time for one more question, and we've got, will Maptek develop a schedule optimizer for Vulcan Gantt Scheduler?
That is certainly the hope. So if we're looking at our project, or if we're looking at VGS on the whole, it's our newer product, but as we've been growing and having a dedicated development team, we've been adding a lot of functionality, and with that we're hoping to grow towards adding some optimization capabilities to Vulcan Gantt Scheduler.
All right, thank you. So we're nearing the end of our time today. If we did not address your question, we will answer those offline. If you have additional questions, feel free to contact Rosemary directly or email support@maptek.com. And on behalf of the entire Maptek team, thank you for attending. We hold a different webinar each month, so please visit maptek.com to view the entire schedule. Thank you and have a great day.